Hello and welcome to WITA. Thank you for your patience as we sorted through some technical issues getting us started. We truly appreciate you joining us for this next event in our series looking at important WTO matters in advance of the WTO's 14th Ministerial. It's our hope that this seminar series will be especially helpful to individuals who may be supporting their ministries in advance of MC14 and others interested in the structure and functioning of the WTO. The next event in the series takes place next Wednesday, February 18th, and looks at whether MFN is still relevant in a rapidly changing world. And we'll be holding two more events to wrap up the series in March leading to MC14. This entire series is free to attend thanks to the support of our WITA International sponsors, the National Pork Producers Council, Trade Data Monitor, Coupang, Visa, the U.S. Council for International Business, National Foreign Trade Council, and the Information Technology Industry Council. Information on all these events and our 2026 International Trade Conference, which is taking place later this month, can be found on our website, www.wita.org. Thank you. As you know, if you've joined us for one of our webinars in the past, we like to call out the names of some of those you're in community with on Zoom, even if you can't see them on screen. So welcome today to Eric Rono, a Senior Trade Officer at the Kenyan Ministry of Industrialization, Trade, and Enterprise Development, Jan Walter, Aiken Gump in Geneva, Jorge Ruda, Trade Counsel with the U.S. House Ways and Means Committee, and Cherry Taylor, Professor of Law at the South Texas College of Law in Houston. Welcome, Eric, Jan, Jorge, and Cherry, and welcome to all of you. If you're watching this on Zoom, you can also ask questions of our panel using a Q&A tab on Zoom. You should have also received a copy of today's event program by email, and that email contains a link to see all our panelists' biographies. As a reminder, what we say today on this webinar is current based on what we know today, Friday, February 13th at 9 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. in Geneva. But things are changing quickly in our trade world, so if you're not watching this live, things might have changed. As I mentioned last week, the Uruguay round of trade negotiations, which eventually led to the creation of the WTO, started in 1986, which was 40 years ago. The WTO came into being in 1995, 1 year before Google was even invented. How can any organization keep up with the myriad of challenges that have engulfed the world these past 30 years without looking hard at itself and seeking new ways to move forward? Last week, we heard from our first round of ambassadors discussing MC14 and WTO reform. And this week, we're pleased to welcome 5 more ambassadors from countries and regions playing pivotal roles in the reform discussions and planning of the 14th Ministerial Conference. Welcome to Ambassador Sung-Yo Choi, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Republic of Korea to the World Trade Organization. Ambassador Salomon Eheth, Permanent Mission of the Republic of Cameroon to the World Trade Organization and the host for MC14. Ambassador João Machado, Permanent Representative of the European Union to the World Trade Organization. Ambassador Guilherme Patriota, Permanent Representative of Brazil to the World Trade Organization. Ambassador Zukisi Bobo, excuse me if I had any problems with the pronunciation, Permanent Representative of South Africa to the World Trade Organization. Welcome, ambassadors, and welcome to our moderator, Angela Ellard, a non-resident senior advisor, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and the former Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization. Angela, thank you for your partnership in helping us steer this seminar series in advance of MC14.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. And thanks, of course, to WITA for hosting this very important series on the WTO Matters. So very pleased to be here today. Of course, a welcome to the ambassadors from Geneva who are joining us. We're delighted to have you here, and we're looking forward to this discussion. As Ken mentioned, we had a similar session on February 4th with 4 other ambassadors. That was Ambassador Barloon from the United States, Ambassador Olberg from Norway, Ambassador Kelly from New Zealand, and Ambassador Wilson from Barbados. And that discussion is available on YouTube through the WITA site. That session was quite popular, and we expect that this session today will be as well. I should note that our effort here has been to be in our selection of ambassadors to be as representative as possible of geographic regions, level of development, and a variety of viewpoints. I note that we also invited China and India, but unfortunately they were unable to join us. So as we did with the last session with ambassadors, we will divide today's into 2 rounds. The first and shorter round relates to each ambassador's expectations and goals with respect to MC14, which starts in Cameroon on March 26th. And the second round will be a bit longer, and that will be specific questions aimed at each ambassador with respect to views on WTO reform, which of course is the key issue for the day. I would note that with MC14 beginning in about 6 weeks now, it's coming fast. There are high expectations and the world is watching. And of course, it occurs against a backdrop of a lot of uncertainty in trade policy. But at the same time, the WTO is still more than plugging along, and 73% of global trade is still covered by WTO rules. And that is a significant point to remember. The reality for MC14 is that it is, after all, a point in time, and that the organization also needs to plan for what happens after MC14. And this is where a lot of the reform discussion will come into play. So in terms of MC14 and some of the topics under discussion, just a brief, very brief intro before we hear from our ambassadors. We expect the following topics will come up. One is the review of the extension of the moratorium on the collection of duties for electronic transmissions, which expires at Cameroon at the Ministerial. Also, the work program on e-commerce, which is set to expire at that same time. We expect there'll also be a discussion on plurilaterals within the WTO, especially the Investment Facilitation for Development Agreement, which has about 128 sponsors, about 3/4 of the membership of the WTO. With respect to reform, there are a variety of issues and topics, and you will hear about this today. In fact, the WTO has launched Reform Month to discuss the various topics in an effort to lay out a roadmap for the ministers to consider and then to give to the ambassadors in Geneva for their work after MC14. We heard in the last session on February 4th from Ambassador Olberg, who's the chair, the facilitator of the reform discussions, and he laid out some of the factors that members are considering. Also, a variety of other things going on at the WTO. The fish subsidies agreement has entered into force. And in addition, the Fish Fund has already started to award grants to developing members and has started a second call for proposals. Agriculture discussions are still very much underway, although the ambassadors have not yet reached a path forward on those negotiations. And the trade facilitation agreement is still getting new members joining, so that's a very positive sign as well. So with that introduction, let's move to our first round, in which I'll ask each ambassador to speak about priorities and goals for MC14. And we will start with the ambassador from Cameroon, Ambassador Salomon Eheth, because, of course, after all, Cameroon is hosting MC14. Salomon, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Angela. Good morning. Good morning in Washington. Good morning, Kent. And good morning, good afternoon, dear colleagues here in Geneva. Thanks for inviting me to participate in this important panel. I am pleased to share some of perspective of my country, Cameroon, as the host of the MC14. The government and the people of Cameroon are looking forward to welcome you in Yaoundé next month. We are honored that this important conference, one which will be a turning point for WTO at the multilateral trading system, is taking place on African soil. Therefore, the overarching goal of my government is to ensure that MC14 is successful. Several members are of the view that this success must be captured in Yaoundé Ministerial Conference declaration. And our measurement for successful MC14 is one that will deliver on WTO reform and other development-centered outcomes. In this regard, I will share 5 broad expectations Cameroon envisage for MC14. The first one is a ministerial declaration whereby ministers provide clear guidance for work post MC14 on the 3 reform tracks which have been discussing here in Geneva. These tracks include decision-making, development, level playing field. We also hope that minister will instruct officials in Geneva on the way forward for the long overdue dispute settlement system reform. Secondly, agriculture is the backbone of African economies. Cameroon agriculture sector employs over 60 to 70% of the active population, and it contributes approximately 20% of the GDP. Therefore, while the reform agenda is key, a ministerial outcome on agriculture and cotton is of paramount importance. Thirdly, in line with Cameroon National Development Strategy 2030, development is an important file in the WTO. We hope that members can build on momentum from MC13 to deliver over tangible outcomes which will advance our work on special and differential treatment provision contained in WTO agreement. My fourth point is the conclusion of the second phase of the negotiation on fishery subsidies, as you said. In her former capacity as Deputy Director General, our dear Angela, you handled these files impressively. We also have a new chairperson in charge of this negotiation. So I think we are very close. My fifth and last point is the Investment Facilitation for Development Agreement. As one of the facilitators of IFD agreement, the incorporation of this agreement as an annex in the Marrakesh Agreement is a priority for Cameroon at MC14. Finally, on strategy to ensure a smooth and successful MC14, I think it is important that no member should feel left out in Yaoundé. We are working closely with the chairperson of the General Council and the Director General, Dr. Ngozi, of the WTO to ensure that all ministerial deliberations in Yaoundé respect the principle of full participation, inclusivity, transparency. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for laying out those issues very clearly. I think it's helpful guidance for all of us. Ambassador Patriota, I turn to you, Guilherme.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you to WITA for inviting me to this discussion. Well, for Brazil, MC14 is a key moment, I think, in the history of the World Trade Organization under the current international scenario. So we are facing new challenges in terms of trade, with a lot of actions happening, a lot of important bilateral agreements that are being performed in a very accelerated manner, and much of what is being today negotiated makes one ask himself whether the system is still valid and worthwhile. So this is a question I think we have to answer at MC14 in Cameroon. We're trying to do that by focusing on a reform package. Hopefully this reform package can be refined and concluded still in Geneva for the ministers to have a look at it, to express their views on it, and ideally to endorse this package. And I think the package has to include, right now it does include the elements that Ambassador Eheth Salomon just mentioned, this discussion on decision-making within the WTO, a deep discussion on development and all that it implies. It's not just a question about graduation of countries or special and differential treatment. Brazil hopes that the debate on development goes way beyond that, that it looks into the rules themselves and what is needed for the trade system to better support development, where development is still required, and to support other new developments, let's say, like a new effort in sustainable agriculture, industrial transitions towards low emission or energy transitions and things like that. So it's a big discussion. We have also the level playing field discussion. This is an area that includes different things for different members, but it allows for a discussion also on the new enhanced forms of support to industrial production, manufacturing, and how this may lead to certain structural asymmetries globally that need to be dealt with. But we hope for Brazil that it will also entail the discussion on emerging agricultural issues, which we have named, there's an acronym for it, it's called EAT. So this is also a parallel discussion. If you're going to discuss the new trends in industrial production and manufacturing, you also need to discuss this with respect to agriculture. And so this is a big package. You mentioned the other kind of topics, which are more traditional outcomes from the normal agenda of the WTO, like the moratorium on e-commerce. The discussion on plurilaterals is a systemic one. It should be a systemic one. We hope that it will be looked at it in this way, that it's not just a basis for taking a decision on the existing plurilateral agreements, in particular the Investment Facilitation for Development Agreement. We hope that a discussion on plurilaterals goes beyond that. What happens to the future of the WTO? Are we going to plurilateralize the whole system? To what extent, under what rules, what criteria? If we do this too much, the system will no longer be multilateral in nature. Is this what we want? So for Brazil, we support multilateralism. We think that the multilateral components of the WTO should be reaffirmed in Yaoundé. And for us, two central elements of that is the most favored nation principle, and on the other hand, the dispute settlement mechanism, the multilateral one, the one that belongs to the WTO that is currently not fully functional. So those are the goals for Brazil. Agriculture is hugely important. It was mentioned by Ambassador Salomon Eheth also. It's a development question. And it's also a trade issue, because I think half of world trade is agriculture related, or agro-business, if you will. And we have, for the last 30 years, not made any new important stride towards greater liberalization of trade in this particular sector, which has lots more protection and support than the industrial sector. So I think we have to deal with that. And hopefully we can say something to that effect that commits Minister to real negotiations post MC14 on agriculture. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for laying some very meaty issues on the table for discussion today. Next, I turn to Ambassador Kobo from South Africa, who is the chair of the Committee on Trade and Development, for your views on MC14. Over to you, Zu.
Thanks, Angela. Lovely to see you again. I think we all agree that MC14 is a stage for ministers. It's a stage for ministers to reflect on the work of the organization thus far against the backdrop of the imperative for reforming a system that is not working optimally. For a number of reasons. So we expect that the ministers will have an opportunity to reflect across the different issues that the reform facilitator has laid out, from decision-making to development, special and differential treatment, and level playing field. And we also of the view that there should be attention paid to agriculture, for reasons that Ambassador Patriota has articulated, but also because this is an area that reflects or captures historical inequities in the system, where the playing field is far from level. For us, the WTO has a special role in responding to development, but also in responding to the changing global economic environment. The most favored nations principle remains sound and important. I think we should be careful not to attempt paths that may lead to fragmentation of the system or weakening its base. The principle of non-discrimination, therefore, is very important. We also should realize that the reform discussions are taking place against unprecedented global disruptions in recent history, where there are bits and pieces of bilateral negotiations that are happening, setting new tariff levels that are very much in breach of the most favored nation, and that could undermine the multilateral trading system. In addition to that, multilateralism is important for fostering global cooperation. I think these affirmations are going to be very important at MC 14, and I think countries should resist the temptation to try and nuance it or calibrate it in ways that does not advance the multilateral quality of trade. Thirdly, we as South Africa are of the view that the system thus far has not benefited developing countries by and large. If you take out one region, especially, and look at the balance sheet of trade and development, it is very poor. The Marrakesh Agreement set out very clearly that the system ought to take positive action to promote sustainable development, to benefit developing and least developed countries, that they capture a growing share of world trade, that their incomes rise, and that they have an opportunity to prosper. So if the WTO is to be relevant, it ought to be relevant to workers, to firms, and to communities, and development remains a structural deficit in the system. If you by and large, many developing countries still account for less than 1% of global trade. If you take one or two regions out of the equation, 60% of developing countries are commodity dependent. They do not have the kind of instruments required to take legitimate public policy action, to drive industrialization, to undertake value-adding activities. That is in contrast to what you see today, where large economies and developed countries have national security exceptions that are unconstrained, and they can take policy space without having to account to the WTO. The asymmetries of power would make it difficult for developing countries to behave similarly, because they would very soon be reminded bilaterally. So they don't have the leverage, they don't have the sort of capabilities that many developed countries possess. So for us, very strongly, development is key, as a key outcome at MC14. Application in more precise and effective terms of special and differential treatment for developing countries is going to be very, very important. So we cannot allow the kind of propositions that suggest sort of a dilution, a granular, targeted-based SNDT in a climate where global disruptions, where systemic challenges have compounded the difficulties that are faced by many developing countries and LDCs. And also, where this criteria is very narrowly defined, there's a talk of the World Bank income measure, OECD membership, or export share in world trade. And it is curious that other dimensions of vulnerability are not taken into account. For an example, the index of commodity dependence, export complexity, the asymmetries of tech diffusion, and other capabilities that are not similarly shared among countries. So for us, we will be pushing a very strong view to have a clear development outcome as part of the bargain, the compact that would come out of MC14 to constitute a roadmap for work to be done in Geneva post MC14. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. And you have you've raised several issues that I think we'll discuss more in the second round of questions as well. So you've laid a good framework for us for that. Ambassador Machado from the European Union, over to you next, João.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you. I'm really honored to be invited by WITA to participate in this discussion, and great pleasure to see you again, Angela. Well, for the European Union, the WTO is passing a crucial moment. It's being challenged as it has never been before in the last 30 years. And the MC14, I think it's a very important moment. You can even say it's an existential moment for the WTO and the multilateral trading system. So for us, the main objective for the ministerial in Yaoundé is to agree on a solid program of reforms that we can take it forward in the period post MC14 in the run-up to the next ministerial in 2 years afterwards. We are speaking not to agree on reforms right now. We are speaking about agreeing on a program of issues to be discussed, and with a process that is clear with timelines, because we don't want simply to engage in another 2 years of talking without a sense of direction. We don't think the system will be well served and could be even further challenged if we are going in that road. So we need to have a robust program of issues to be discussed. I want to insist that, and you at your last session, the facilitator, Ambassador Olberg, certainly spoke about the issues, and it has been by my colleagues already mentioned: decision-making, development, SDT, level playing field. This is certainly not the whole universe of things that should be part of a reform work program, but we need to start. And we need to start with these issues that have been the first to be identified. But I think it's important to make clear that the reform discussion will not be exhausted in these 3 topics. But it's a key priority. We cannot come out of MC14 with no agreement on reform work program, or a very weak. I think it will send a very bad political signal. And the result risks being that increasingly more members will say, why wait? And we will see more and more deviations from the multilateral rules. I think that would be a very bad outcome. In parallel, and we are working in Geneva in that sense, trying to get concrete decisions that are of interest to business, because it's the way to keep the system also relevant to business. And here comes the question of the extension of the e-commerce moratorium and the e-commerce work program. Here comes as well the plurilateral loan investment facilitation for development, which I think it's important from a development perspective. The majority of the membership, as you said, is 3/4 of the WTO membership, and the vast majority are developing and least developed countries. And these are important outcomes that are ready, provided that we can agree, but it's ready-made. And then there are discussions that are still ongoing, whether we can agree on something, a process, the declaration, a statement. I'm not going into those details on agriculture. That continues to be extremely important to a large part of the membership. Difficulty is that until now, we have been unable among the members to see how to move forward on agriculture. We have the mandate already, which is Article 20, and subsequent decisions like the PSH decision. We have the instrument, the forum, we have the negotiating forum. So we are not missing tools. The problem is that members have not been able to agree until now. So we need to see what it takes so that we can make, again, efforts to try to advance on agriculture. I will make a point regarding the plurilaterals. In our view, plurilaterals are complementary and can be supportive of the multilateral trading system. We don't see that as antagonism with the system. And the case of IFTA, it's ready. It's just a question of overcoming the doubts that one or two members still have with regard to IFTA. This can be, with political will, this can be agreed at MC14. Then there is a separate discussion that certainly should come as part of the reform agenda, is what role the plurilaterals in a future reform system. And there are many things to be discussed there, but I think it will be a disservice if we try to take hostage the IFD, the Agreement on Investment Facilitation, that is already concluded, and the majority, even non-participants, support it, with exception one or two so far, that we push the can down the road under the pretext that we are going to discuss these in the reform in the future. I think we need to make an effort to address that right now, and we welcome very much South Africa. We had some reluctance, but in December announced that would not oppose the integration of that agreement. We welcome very much that type of attitude. We should try to adopt the agreement now, and then discussions about the role of plurilaterals in which forms in the future. Fine, this should be part of the discussions on the reform. So I would stop here. These are basically, for us, again, the reform agenda is central. Is central for a successful MC14, and it's a moment that we cannot miss. Thank you.
Okay, unmuted now. Yes, definitely a moment that we cannot miss, with reform being the centerpiece. I'll turn last in this first round to Ambassador Choi from Korea, who serves in the important role as co-convener of the Plurilateral Agreement, the Investment Facilitation for Development Agreement. So over to you, Sonia.
Hi, Angela. Thank you so much for inviting me to this important session. But after hearing from Ambassador of EU, there is not much for me to add. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, we have the same, the speaking note probably, but yeah, but I will say just MC14 takes place at a very critical juncture for the WTO, because everyone is saying that WTO is in crisis and multilateral trading system is in danger, with rising trade tensions and increasing fragmentation of global trade. But Korea is one of the biggest beneficiaries of WTO, multilateral trading system. It is very heartbreaking for us to witness this kind of declining relevance of the WTO. So we sincerely hope that MC14 will serve as an opportunity to reaffirm WTO members' commitment to the multilateral trading system. So we see three main objectives, and those objectives are the same as EU. So first, on reform, we think we need to secure a very robust, solid work plan that can guide us to the MC15. So I think that one of the fundamental reasons we find ourselves in the current situation is WTO's failure to adequately adapt to changing global trade environment. Since 1995, neither successive market liberalization nor meaningful update to the rule book have taken place to ensure that WTO remains fit for purpose. So we need more flexibility in decision making and governance, and more effective and targeted approach to development, including SNDT, and serious consideration of updating the rule book to ensure a level playing field. That is about the reform. And turning to the e-commerce moratorium. So for more than 2 decades, the moratorium has provided stability and predictability for digital trade. So failing to extend it would amount to questioning the WTO's relevance in the digital age. So in this context, we joined the US proposal on permanent moratorium on e-commerce. I think we WTO members need to do some active outreach and engagement to the private sector so that we can still show to the outside world that WTO is still relevant. And last but not least, IFDA. So as Ambassador João already mentioned, IFDA is ready to be incorporated to the WTO rulebook. So incorporation is very important for the WTO members for 2 main reasons. First, development dimension. When development aid is drying up, FDI is the only source for economic development for low-income countries. So in that sense, maybe what some major economies, big economies, may not require this agreement to attract FDI. However, for small developing members and LDCs, we think that incorporation of this agreement is dearly needed. And the second part is about the systemic implication. Incorporating the IFDA into the WTO will reinforce the relevance and credibility of the WTO. If we fail in incorporating this agreement to the WTO, how can we say that WTO is really serious about the reform if you cannot just do the incorporation at this moment when more than 3/4 of the membership is on board, and then all the development dimension is there, and then you cannot incorporate it, then how can we really say that we are very true to our goal of reform? So I think there is a very urgent need for us to do that for MC14. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for highlighting some of those key points. Yes, as you said, maybe some of the others had mentioned some of these points, but you put your own emphasis and twist on them. So I do appreciate that. Okay, so that brings us now to our second round of discussion, moving from MC14 in particular to the question of reform, and to get the various perspectives of our ambassador panel on reform. So I'll start again with our host for MC14 from Cameroon, the ambassador from Cameroon, because given your role as host ambassador, you have an important role to assure that the ministers have something before them that they can consider, and to have a minimum of back and forth at the ministerial on these issues. In other words, that Geneva needs to do its work to present something to the ambassadors for their consideration. Last week, as I noted, Ambassador Olberg briefed WITA members on what is happening, what his effort is. So in your view, Ambassador, what needs to happen in Geneva on reform in particular to be successful in Cameroon? And do you think that the next month or so that the schedule is laid out in such a way that it will get us there? So over to you, Salomon.
Thank you, Angela, and I totally agree with your introduction. I'm happy that, as you mentioned in your first introduction, you have had an opportunity to interact, to hear directly from Ambassador Olberg. I must say that he has done a phenomenal job since he assumed the role of facilitator for WTO reform under the auspices of the General Council. We all recognize that this is not an easy task, but Ambassador Olberg has been successful in steering the membership towards a common objective. As I already mentioned them in my earlier intervention, all members have worked intensively on 3 distinct tracks, namely decision-making, development including age and duty, and level playing field. It is very encouraging to see that all members have engaged very actively in all these 3 tracks. Some members have also submitted position paper or ideas to shape the process and outcome. We went through the communication from European Union, United States, the African Group, Paraguay, ACP, and many others. All these papers contain excellent ideas. To answer directly to your question, for reform to be successful in Cameroon, I believe that we need to examine very member submission on its own merit. This is like a novel exercise for WTO members, so very voice matters. I also think that as we get closer to MC14, we must continue conducting all reform-related meetings in a transparent manner, as we have started, and ensure that all members participate not only in the process, but also in shaping what will be put before ministers in Yaoundé. This brings me to another point. Yaoundé must not be seen as the end of the reform journey. On the contrary, MC14 should be seen as the beginning of the long reform journey. Therefore, members must be mindful of the limited time minister will have in Yaoundé to deliberate on these 3 tracks. In the limited time left before MC14, we must zone in and focus only on areas where there is a clarity and convergence among the entire membership. Lastly, Ambassador Olberg has circulated a draft flexible post MC14 work plan for consideration by members. I think that if there are any other issue which need to be discussed in Geneva after MC14, we can reflect them in this document. That's why I can say at this moment, thank you so much. Thanks again, Angela, for inviting me in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm glad you noted the importance of transparency in this process. And of course, that the work at this stage is to create a plan with accountability for the Geneva-based delegations to manage, but of course with help from capitals, because it will take that level of political support. Next, I will turn to Ambassador Machado from the European Union, because the EU has recently issued a paper on reform that was very widely read, very detailed, on the goals for reform, in emphasizing predictability, fairness, flexibility. The EU also notes that some members have developed significantly without corresponding reciprocal liberalization. and that the WTO's existing Article 28 process to renegotiate tariff bindings is cumbersome and designed to protect the status quo. The EU notes that a debate on the fundamentals underpinning the current balance of rights and commitments is needed. So my question to you, João, then is, in this sense, do you share the US view on MFN? In other words, that members should be allowed to treat different members differently, or are there nuances between the EU position and the US position? And then finally, what else does the US paper signify to you, particularly its position that some issues are beyond the purview of the WTO? And then, of course, we also have reform papers by developing members, so interested in your views on that as well. So a bit of a mouthful of a question, but I think you're equal to the task.
Thank you, Angela. Well, first point I would like to make is that the European Union supports fully the process and what Ambassador Olberg, the facilitator, is doing in trying to design, together with the membership, a reform program to be adopted at MC14, and particularly, as I referred to earlier, starting with the discussion on decision-making and governance, development, SDT, and level playing field. So we are fully supportive of that process and that objective. But in our communication that we submitted a couple of weeks ago on WTO reform, we go further. In a way, we raise a number of questions that, in our view, are important to be discussed among the membership. We don't believe that the reform that will be necessary for the system to continue to be sustained can be a reform at the margin. We need to address and at least have a serious discussion on issues without taboos. There should be no taboos in discussing the different issues. And it is in that context, Angela, that we are not, I mean, in a way, not saying that some countries have developed without giving support. The system has not worked as intended originally. There was a balance of rights and obligation that was struck in 1995, but the idea was that the WTO would be a permanent forum for negotiation. And the permanent forum for negotiations would be further liberalization, and that those that develop more would converge to a level of obligations that was similar to the others. And it was the way that the system will evolve in a gradual manner, in a dynamic manner. Well, you know very well, this has not happened. So we are stuck today in a balance that was struck in 1995. Let's be clear. It's a balance that was struck last century. As your colleague said earlier, that's at the time where digital was just very incipient, was starting, all these new services were not even there. So the European Union is not discarding that, but what we are saying is that we need to have a discussion. Is that balance still reflecting the realities of today? And if not, what sort of adjustments should we contemplate? So we don't have a clear proposal to make right now, but I think it's an issue that needs to be put on the table and discussed. By the same token, the question of MFN, we are not, I would say, on the same page as the US in the sense that the US already took a decision with regard to MFN. But I think it's a legitimate question, say, to discuss among all the membership, is the MFN principle to which we are still attached because it's a cornerstone of the predictability of the system, no doubt about that, but is the system as the principle as it was conceived is still fully fit for the reality of today. So we want really to have an in-depth discussion of these issues with no taboos. And I think it's the only way that we can redesign, if necessary, the system to be fit for purpose to the current geoeconomic realities and environment. So that's the scene and the background that sets our behind our communication on WTO reform. The United States made a paper, so it submitted the paper in December, and I think the fact that US put a paper out, I think is very much welcomed. There are things that we agree completely. For example, the question that we need more transparency, and this is a point that the United States rightly has been for years banging that we need more transparency. We can not negotiate without knowing what is being done by the different members. So we are fully in line that we need more transparency across the board in notifications, in the policies of members. But we would not take the view, which I think is the view that the United States take with regard to the issue that you mentioned, that certain issues cannot be addressed within the system. We think that we need to address these issues within the system. It will not be easy, but if you want to address these issues, you need to address with everyone that is involved around the table. You cannot address issues and keep some outside. So we believe that we need to have that discussion with everyone inside. So no, at least we have not lost hope that this cannot be achieved within the system. And and that's why that we come with the issue of level playing field, that we need to address this issue and have a discussion on level playing field as part of the reform, which frankly, I think it's also an issue that is the level playing field is something that also, in our view, should interest developing countries. Because on one side, you have developing countries that are very much interested in having policy space for industrialization and for structural transformation, fair enough. But you cannot industrialize if you have other members that have some sort of policies that make it impossible for you to compete. So even the industrialization in the developing countries, I think, needs to be discussed together with the question of level playing field. I think it's illusory to think that you can, through flexibilities or derogations, develop your industry. But on the other side, you have other people that have different types of policies with whom you are competing. And it will be very difficult to compete if you don't have a level playing field between the two. I think these debates need to come together at some point. So that's what I would say at this point. Thank you.
You're muted, Angela.
It's very, very hard to push that little button down there. Sorry about that. But thank you, João, for your comments, in particular for the nuance in distinguishing your position from the position of others. So that's very helpful. At this time, I will turn to Ambassador Choi from Korea, because Korea has been such an important player in the IFDA negotiations, as I mentioned, serving as co-chair with Chile on those negotiations. So I'd like to focus this part on your views with respect to plurilaterals and reform. You got into that a little bit in the first half of the discussion, but please share your thoughts about whether reform is needed to advance plurilaterals within the WTO structure to be able to do both multilateralism and plurilateralism through the WTO. And then I'd like to get your thoughts on development as well. In particular, your view on whether all developing members should be treated the same, regardless of the level of economic development or any other factors. And should developing members that have achieved a certain level of development not receive special treatment? So with that, over to you, Sonia.
Thank you, Angela, for the questions. So, regarding the first part, plurilateral, I think we IFDA members have experienced considerable frustration so far. Although the agreement was concluded in February 2024, and 128 members have since requested its incorporation, it has yet to be incorporated due to the opposition of a few members. And thank you, Ambassador Kobo, again for your very constructive engagement for that. So we gained a very positive momentum for the incorporation, and I cannot, sufficiently say thank you, Ambassador Kobo, for this. And we are firmly convinced that the request to incorporate the IFDA into Annex 4 fully complies with the requirement of Article 10.9 of Marrakesh Agreement. And we, of course, respect the decision of others not to join the IFDA. However, this should not prevent 128 members from benefiting from it, and especially as the agreement imposes no obligation to non-participants and will generate a positive effect for investors from all over the world, including non-participants. So against this backdrop, it is very encouraging that members are increasingly recognizing the need to ensure clear pathways for plurilateral initiatives. But however, as Ambassador of EU already mentioned, we should not mix up two different things. IFDA is already ready to be incorporated right now at the MC14. So we cannot just wait for the reform discussion on plurilateral to have more concrete outcome. So it is kind of IFD incorporation is kind of homework for the entire WTO membership. So we should do our homework before engaging in another big discussion on reform, especially on plurilaterals. And about plurilaterals, I think our ancestors of WTO already provided such pathways for plurilateral because they saw a clear value in plurilateral agreements. Nobody can really deny the huge economic benefits of the GPA, the Government Procurement Agreement, and Information Technology Agreement. So, and then our WTO membership is already 166. So given the different level of development and economic structure and interest among members, some members might want to pursue certain agreements, while others will not necessarily want to pursue that. And that is very much acceptable for us, for everyone. So if a certain agreement, certain plurilateral agreement doesn't impose any obligation on non-parties, then it should be allowed to proceed. That is the basic spirit we have pursuing this IFDA so far. And this kind of arrangement could include opt-in or opt-out participation and safeguard to prevent non-participants from exercising veto power where their real commercial interests are not affected. Such mechanisms would allow agreements such as e-commerce or whatever, which reflect today's trade realities to function effectively within the WTO framework, while leaving the door open for others to join when ready. So our view is that plurilateral initiatives are really complementing the multilateral trading system, not obstructing a multilateral trading system. And then this is my second time to be posted to Geneva. So when I first started to engage in WTO affairs, the negotiations were quite active when we are negotiating Doha round. But nowadays, it is very disappointing for us to see that I mean, there is active multilateral discussions. And then, I mean, WTO corridor is full of tourists rather than negotiators from capital. It is very heartbreaking for us personally. However, I think one of the fundamental reasons and fundamental crisis we are having right now for WTO member is that we are losing confidence in the negotiating function of the WTO. And then the WTO negotiating function is, I mean, kind of paralyzed completely. I mean, depending upon the lifeline of plurilateral agreement. But we cannot really blame plurilateral initiatives for the declining momentum or interest for the multilateral multilateral agreement. So I think as long as this plurilateral is open to others, non-participants, so that they can, I mean, join anytime, and then this is not in violation of the existing structure of the WTO agreement, then I think, I mean, the veto power of some limited number of members should be restrained. And then about your question about development, I'd like to start by saying that Korea attaches great importance to development, and we believe that special and differential treatment should remain focused on addressing the targeted and needs-based approaches. And then we should not forget that the core purpose of SNDT is to address member-specific needs and challenges in a way that supports developing members' full implementation of the agreement and their integration into the global trading system. So sometimes I feel that we should not forget why we joined the WTO in the first place. I think we all joined the WTO because we all believe in the value of open market and rule-based trading system. So we always thought that, implementing the WTO agreement is not a penalty. It's actually beneficial to our economic development. I think all of us joined the agreement with the same belief. So in that sense, I think we should always bear that in mind, that the SNDT provision should target the full implementation of developing and LDC members of the agreement at a final stage. And then I'd like to emphasize that Korea declared in 2019 that we will not seek SNDT provisions or preferential treatment in ongoing and future negotiations as part of its commitment to responsible membership in the WTO. So we encourage other members in a similar position to consider doing the same in order to strengthen the WTO for the benefit of all members. And then we should acknowledge that the world economy has evolved since 1995, when WTO was first established, and big developing economies maybe if they are in a position to do so, then should consider taking on obligations that are commensurate to their economic capacities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You made a lot of important points that I know our subsequent two ambassadors would like to address as well, I'm sure. I'll turn next to South Africa, to Ambassador Kobo, who serves as chair of the Committee on Trade and Development. So good segue from the comments that were made just prior. So perhaps you could describe for us the priorities of developing members, particularly South Africa, with respect to reform. You laid out a little bit of this in the first round of discussions, in particular your strong support of the MFN principle and the comments that you made about national security. And what kind of impact that is within the WTO system. So perhaps you could give your views on where the work stands, the papers that have been submitted by various members, how you view them, your views on plurilateralism and governance, especially given that, as many have noted, South Africa's position on IFDA has evolved so that it is no longer opposed to docking the agreement into the WTO rulebook. So over to you, Sue.
Thanks again, Angela. I'm conscious of the time, so I'll try to be compact and perhaps use as a departure point the EU and the US papers. Thankfully, Ambassador Balloon last week presented the thinking of the US on the multilateral trading system, and today João did the same on the EU. And if you take a very close look at the two papers, the fundamental point that they are making, the essential point that they are making, is that there are structural imbalances in the system, and the varying degrees at which they characterize these structural imbalances for the US and to a degree for the EU as well. These are framed as problems of overcapacity. The excess production that is spilling over, the how certain forms of state intervention are affecting the structure of global trade. Now, I want to make this point that these assertions are made in a very overgeneralized manner. That is not to say there is no validity to them. So they are not founded on empirical, evidence-based assessments, because there are multiple reasons for the shift in the structure of global production and trade, including robotics and AI at the extent of their deployment in certain sectors of the economy, business model innovations, or the different forms in which they are undertaken in the Western world and non-Western world, and several other issues. And certainly you would probably see a negative externality, negative spillover effects as a result of state interventions, but not all state interventions lead to that. Some of the research shows that a lot of the firms that benefited from state interventions have died. They don't compete on a longue durée. So all I'm trying to say is that we need granular, evidence-based, foundations to what becomes a view for reform of the WTO, rather than simply leaving it at generalities, at politics. Having said that, what is most curious is that the structure of the problem is characterized as that of structural imbalances, and that we ought to pay attention to this, focus our minds to this. What both papers ignore completely is the fact that the group of countries that are at the receiving end of structural imbalances and have been for a very long time are developing countries and least developed countries. I mean, they're the ones who are suffering premature deindustrialization. They're the ones who are largely commodity independent. That is where you find high levels of unemployment, lower incomes, or a low share of global trade. So one can go on and on about this. However, the papers have to be welcomed because they make a very important contribution to the debate. And as I said, I think to João or one colleague, it takes a lot to put ideas on paper. It's easy to critique them. So I think it's a great thing that they've done. I think one of the misconceptions that is often imputed to the US paper is that they are anti-special and differential treatment. The US is very clear in its paper that they are not against special and differential treatment, but they want this to be to be targeted, to be more granularly defined. So the point I will make, what I would say is that we have, as developing countries, a stronger claim for the system to overcome structural imbalances. Because even with global trade disruptions, the unilateral tariff measures, developing countries are the most to be affected. They don't have the resilience capabilities that others have. Now, moving very quickly to, so what we want is policy space secured under the WTO for us to be able to undertake structural transformation in our economies. Now, on plurilaterals, I appreciate the commentary made about our stance on the IFD. I would only say here that we would want to see, and I quite appreciate the point João made earlier on, that you have the IFD as an exception, but you need a discussion in the system, and we welcome that discussion. I can state that looks at the criteria for how the system deals with plurilaterals. What sort of plurilaterals does the system allow? What are the guardrails? At what point do you allow for plurilaterals in the system? Would there be sunset clauses or review mechanism? So I'm quite hopeful about the reform discussions at MC14 and the work that we have to do as ambassadors post MC14. And I look forward to working with colleagues in taking that forward. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. Again, a lot of really great nuance here that I'm sure our audience is appreciating. Last but far from least, I turn to Ambassador Patriota from Brazil. Perhaps you could give us a sense of Brazil's priorities on reform. You gave us a sense of that as well in the first round. But we really like to hear from you, your views with respect to governance and MFN, as well as structural asymmetries that you mentioned. Brazil has challenged the U.S. tariffs in the dispute settlement process, so I would note that may be a factor here that you might wish to discuss. Do you see developing members as like-minded when it comes to reform, or are there differences in views? And then finally, in the little time we have remaining, your views on agriculture. And again, you gave us a sense of how Brazil is a leader in trying to get members to think of new ways to discuss agriculture. Guilherme, over to you.
Thank you, Angela. That's a lot on my plate. I think, first of all, a general comment. For Brazil, reform needs to be credible. The system is struggling, it's on fire, and we cannot appear at MC14 with a very narrowly focused agenda of our little niche desires for a particular thing here, a particular thing there. I think either reform, as João mentioned, is real reform, and we're not tweaking things at the margins. We're still not trying to get that little outcome that we've been going for the last 30 years, but we haven't managed to get that particular niche outcome for us because the system as a whole is being neglected. And it's not being neglected by developing countries, and it's not being really impacted by any S&D or development status issue. These are completely irrelevant in terms of their impact on global trade. It's being impacted by the countries that were the creators of the system back in the Uruguay round, back in the GATT years, which were the developed countries. This is a system that is designed and devised by the developed countries with a huge contribution, in particular from the US. And the developed countries are the one who needs to tell us whether they will still be complying or not with the basic principles and rules of the system. I don't think it's the developing countries that need to prove whether they need special treatment. The special treatment, there are small concessions so that developing countries will accept rules that in and of themselves are quite asymmetric against the interest of developing countries. There are rules that have not really taken into account the different conditions for manufacturing, for development in countries of the South. They don't have the same wealth. They don't have the same accumulated capital. They don't have the same access to finance. They are not owners of international currencies. They have a very asymmetric insertion into the global economy. And then they are asked to accept these very stringent, high standard rules of the WTO on areas such as trade-related investment measures, in areas such as intellectual property rights protection, and so on and so forth. So what's in it for them? Well, what's in it for them is that there's rules that apply equally to all. They have a say. So I wouldn't say that consensus necessarily gives developing countries any particular veto powers. Quite the opposite. It has given the US a veto power on the election of arbitrators to the appellate body. And since 2019, because of one particular member, we have simply seen the destruction of the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO. So we need to fix that, because that is the heart and soul of the system. A system of rules and principles that has no enforcement mechanism is no longer a system. And anyone can start doing whatever they want. So this is what we see today. What are we going to do about it? You know, a 50% tariff was applied to Brazil on the so-called reciprocal tariffs. They're not reciprocal because we're not applying those tariffs back. Our tariffs are much lower. 50% tariffs have been applied to India, 39 to Switzerland, so on and so forth. This is complete in disregard of the bound rates that were negotiated and consolidated within the schedules of members in the WTO. Are we going to continue down that road? And now we want to have a discussion about plurilaterals. We want to have a discussion about S&D. I think we have to connect with reality. Otherwise, outsiders will not be interested anymore in a system like this. And they will find our conversation very uninteresting and boring, because they will say, well, they're not addressing the real issues of the world, the things that we read in the first pages of the newspapers. So to me, there should be, as João said, no taboo subject. We should deal face on, head on, with the real impactful. We're talking about S&D with these small little things. A small country will have 3 additional years to implement a certain obligation. That's nothing. That's peanuts. On the other hand, you have countries saying, well, anything that I adopt as a measure in my economy and that I justify in terms, for example, of national security interest is not within the jurisdiction of the WTO anymore. So I can do whatever I want. This is real S&D, right? Anything that relates to the environment and that I justify on that basis, I have an exception from any rules of the WTO. They don't apply to me. So I can do any measure, I can take any measure regarding, for example, deforestation or carbon emissions, carbon border adjustment measures that are quite against the exporters from the South. They raise the cost of exports for poor exporters of the South. They cannot enter these markets anymore. And we're not saying anything about that. They're just punching these huge holes into the system. And then you want to sort of have a conversation about S&D and needs-based assessment of developing countries. I would like to find what is the needs-based of developed countries to adopt these supposedly environmentally related trade measures that so negatively affect coffee exports from Central American countries, banana exports from African countries, cocoa exports from different places, from Brazil, if you will, so on and so forth. You know, that's the real discussion. So I think no taboo. I think we cannot reform at the margins, as João has said. We should relinquish this tendency to show up in ministerials with these little particular small subjects that we want to have a win with these little subjects. I don't think that the discussion on decision-making is a discussion only about veto power, because the veto power has been exercised first and foremost against the dispute settlement mechanism, which has been non-functional since 2019. So we have to do something about that. And then the other rules, well, if you want to discuss plurilateral, we have to discuss it overall systemically. You cannot say, oh, I want my plurilateral agreement first, and then the other ones, we will discuss general rules for them. Okay, so if you want another plurilateral on something of your interest, for example, I would like perhaps to have plurilaterals on exports of fruits and vegetables from Brazil. Okay, so then, okay, I want a good rule for me. I want to be able to negotiate this plurilateral freely without requiring consensus of anyone. So, okay, that's a possibility. We can discuss that. But we have to discuss general rules that apply to all. Otherwise, it becomes a complete mess, a chaos. Everyone launching plurilateral negotiations that may be inconsistent with the general rules. It may be incompatible with each other. You know, the two examples that were mentioned are very different agreements, the one on government procurement and the one on information technologies. These are very different in nature. They were negotiated way back. So I think the world is different. We hope we have a real discussion. And if we want to tweak the system, we cannot tweak at the margins. We have to re-examine everything. We have to examine trips, trims. We have to look at services again. We have to see how countries can really apply their industrial policies without being shackled to certain rules, because other countries are not. They're not complying with the rules. So either everyone complies or nobody complies. So that's, to me, the great question mark that we have to answer when we go to Yaoundé. I hope we can do that.
Thank you. That was such a rich discussion from all of you that I'm going to prevail upon you to stay for 1 more minute apiece, if I may, so that you can respond to each other. And we've also gotten a question in the chat if members would give their positions on the e-commerce moratorium, whether it should be extended or not, whether that should be permanent or for a time certain. So I'm going to turn it over to each of you for 1 minute. Pardon me, but I will enforce that 1 minute. And we will go in the same order that we started. So we will start with Ambassador Salomon Eheth from Cameroon for 1 minute. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Angela. Let me start by quickly saying that we are facing difficult moments. I think MC14 is an occasion to strengthen multilateralism, to revitalize WTO, and to go straight for moratorium. I think it's very important to extend it or to make it permanent. So I think for Cameroon, we are working hard to make to facilitate the meetings, to host very well our host. So I think let us take this opportunity with MC14 to try to change the world, to try to consolidate WTO, and to try to make the life convenient for everybody. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to you, João, from the EU, Ambassador Machado.
Thank you, Angela. I think it was a very good discussion. I agree with a lot that my colleague Ambassador Patriota mentioned. We need to have a serious discussion. This is the start. We have had mandates on reform in the last 2 ministerials, MC12 and MC13, which were a paragraph, and it has not led us anywhere. We cannot do that this time again. We need to have a substantive discussion. It will be difficult, but the times are difficult and deserve that we spend time reflecting on this. So we are for it. I think that's the only way that we can maintain the system relevant and to the interest of our companies and exporters. Only commerce moratorium we support. An extension, a permanent extension, and I hope that we can agree on an outcome at Yaoundé. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to Korea next, Ambassador Choi. Sung-Yo, please.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you to every ambassadors who made a great contribution to this meeting. It was a very good discussion, and I learned a lot too. But I'd like to say once again that if we cannot get this IFDA incorporation at the MC14, I think, the WTO reform discussion would lose, its credibility. if WTO members cannot agree on this simple incorporation for this agreement, which was concluded 2 years ago, then how could international community would have a confidence in WTO's capacity to deliver something meaningful to the members and to the global economy? So that is my last word. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Kobo from South Africa.
So thanks. I agree with colleagues. I think the idea that there should not be no taboo, which João Pandit makes perfect sense. We've got to review everything. We can't say we are going to review the imbalances that pertain to my interests only at the conclusion or at the creation of the WTO, but others, we must not look at it. So I think the rule book has to be priced open to look at the extent to which it addresses today's difficulties, including compounded development difficulties, the extent to which it facilitates the integration of countries into global trade, but with an additionality, because there are existing structural inequalities in the world. Developed countries are different from developing countries, by and large. I know there are exceptions that are pointed to at times, and the reform outcomes should not entrench those already existing inequalities. So I'm hoping that as we go to Cameroon, there will be a strong attempt to build trust, to make the process transparent and inclusive, and to deliver balanced outcomes. On e-commerce, we always say that as members, this is a sector we know very little about. It's still evolving in different ways. There's AI. So permanence is foreclosing possibilities for different pathways of regulating and reviewing how the sector is regulated. So I think we should be careful of what we wish for. Thanks.
Thank you. If I may, that you spoke about permanence, do you want to speak about something short of permanence?
I do think we should consider the renewal as we've been doing, but deepen the discussion, especially on the work program for development. I don't want to hog the space, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. The final word goes to Ambassador Patriota from Brazil. Guilherme.
Yeah, if I may, just a simple comment on dispute settlement. I think it's important to state that Brazil was really open to discussing many comments that were provided by members such as the US on shortcomings of the system in the past, the way it worked. And many of these, I would also, they amounted actually to criticism of certain aspects of the dispute settlement system, overreach, an adjudicatory system when it should just be settling disputes objectively amongst members, so on and so forth. And we are quite sensitive to that criticism and to those. We're very open to having a serious discussion with all members on how to correct, let's say, possible flaws of the past and how to devise a system that would be more impartial and more effective, and that would allow all members to feel comfortable again within the WTO family of nations. So that's an important, I think, statement I would like to make, because if you just repeat that you want a fully functional system that has all of the previous extreme sort of radical aspects to it, what you're saying is that you will not negotiate anything with anyone. And what you're actually doing is you're sabotaging the prospect of having a system again. On e-commerce, I think we have to have a serious discussion. We have a fully fledged agreement on the table. Brazil is not a part of it. I think we need to go back to that agreement and have a full discussion on e-commerce and how the disciplines of trade would have to be adapted to this new reality of e-commerce kind of overtaking analogical trade. Let's say the trade we had before the electronic, the age of digital occurred. So to me, just to isolate this, the moratorium issue is really not the answer to the challenges. I think we have to look at e-commerce and AI. They're becoming such big parts of our economy, and that's where most of the money and profits will go to. So, you know, what happens with the fiscal pace of national governments if they permanently right now decide they will not regulate, they will not do anything, they will allow complete freedom without anything. I think this is something that needs to be further discussed, and we're open to having that discussion in a particular body in the WTO. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just to put a finer point on that, how does that translate to your position on the moratorium itself at MC14, whether it should be extended, and of course the work program as well, in just 3 seconds, please?
Well, I don't want to preempt my position. We have been going along with the renewal of the moratorium at each ministerial meeting, and I think that's the wisest and most prudent path forward. In addition to the extension, there's the business of whether or not the moratorium covers content, which I think it's a huge substantive question that has to be further explored. And some members have proposed not just the permanency of the extension, but also to incorporate the idea that it comprises content as well. And this has never been really discussed. So I think we should stay prudent. We will not object to a renewal. I think making it permanent is really premature right now.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And that will end our discussion. Just want to thank our panelists for staying over. Really appreciate that. Very good discussion. Thank you to our audience as well. I think it's very clear from the caliber of the presentations and the discussion by each of the ambassadors today and the 4 ambassadors that we had last week. I know for myself, the caliber certainly gives me a lot of confidence in the ability of the WTO, of its membership to figure this out, but it's going to be a long road. There's no doubt about that. Please join us for our session next week on MFN on the 18th of February. And with that, I say happy Valentine's Day and turn it over to Ken.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for your patience and sticking with us, for our audience as well. Thank you, ambassadors. A truly rich conversation, many things to think about. I know a lot of people are listening. Truly grateful to all of you. Angela, thank you for your partnership on this series. Ambassadors, thank you so much for joining us. Have a lovely weekend and happy Valentine's Day, everybody.